You've had a lot to do with China over the years. They've been in the news a lot lately. You've just renegotiated your deal with CITIC. Tell us about that.
Well, it's good that we've been able to make available for them more iron ore to process here in Australia rather than just ship it and employ more Australians. So we've done a deal with them, which they had an option over another 1 billion tonnes of ore, and they've exercised that option. It's currently before Foreign Investment Review Board, and we think that'll go ahead and create a lot more jobs in the Pilbara, help Mr McGowan out for his sagging economy.
And what about you? It'll help you out? You add a little bit extra to the coffers?
Give us a bit more money to spend.
All right, now the Chinese have been getting a lot of flack, obviously about the virus, but also about the trade sanctions on Australia. What do you think their end game is with Australia right now?
Well, I think they want to demonstrate to the world that what they say goes. If you want Chinese investment, you'll have to follow Chinese policy. You've got to remember the Chinese government's run by the Chinese Communist Party, and the party is the supreme body, and they don't want to have countries taking independent stances against their will. If they're going to invest in a country, they normally want the country to comply. I mean, up in Sri Lanka now, I think that Mandarin is being taught in schools because they defaulted on a large loan that they had to build a port up there. So that's the way they do business. They see you're either with us, as George Bush would say, or against us, and they expect that. Of course, with iron ore, it's different. Australia holds all the cards but never uses them. All they need to do is put a 10% tariff on the iron ore or an export licence, which the Commonwealth could do, and that money could go to our wine producers and others who are missing out by the sort of tariffs they're facing in China. But they'll never do that, the Australian government. They haven't got the guts.
What about this deal between the United States, Australia and the UK, particularly around the submarines and the strategic military offensive? How important is that as a deterrent to China?
I think it's very important, but it really lacks. We need nuclear submarine now, and we should be leasing them. And when I was in Parliament, I first of all said we needed a nuclear sub with the Prime Minister Abbott. Then it was rejected. I met with him and said that, although I think he agreed with me, he decided to go with diesel subs. And certainly what Scott Morrison's done, I think Anthony Albanese approves it too, that we need to be nuclear. We need to be nuclear now, but we should be using our resources in Australia, our uranium in South Australia, to create cheaper electricity for Australians. Nuclear power is zero emissions. It's cheaper. We can use our resources, and all the countries we're competing with have got that benefit. But why are we not using our own uranium and processing it and creating jobs here? I'll never know.
Clive, China was very, very defensive about Wuhan and the spread of the coronavirus, to the point where it seemed that they bullied the WHO, and they've taken out a lot of their angst on Australia. What are your thoughts on what happened in Wuhan? And you saw Sharri Marks's documentary, which was terrific. Do you think it came out of a lab?
Well, if you go back to William Shakespeare, he would say, "Thou dost protest too much." If there's nothing to hide, there's no need to protest. But of course, we come from a society where we believe in an open democracy and transparency. They come from a society where it's secretive, where deals are done in the back door and nobody knows what's happening. So it's a clash of cultures as well. And we've got to realise that the Chinese government is really there for the Chinese government, the Chinese people primarily, not for the West.
Climate change, the Prime Minister's saying he's hoping Australia will get to zero emissions by 2050. Of course, China say they've committed to zero emissions by 2060, which will be a tough ask. What are your thoughts on climate change and the way in which we're sort of looking 20, 30 years ahead?
Well, I think when you look at climate change over the eons of time, I think we saw the world getting a lot colder. In the 1850s, it went down from a very high level, and we still haven't got back to the level that we were 1840 or times like that. But the world is definitely warming, but warming from a very low base. That's what the studies tell us. But the real thing for Australia is, should we have to pay a penalty for jobs and for economic development and standard of living when other countries are not doing it? So our party said that we should have a ETS at the same time our trading partners do, such as China, the United States and Europe, so we're not at a disadvantage. We can't go it alone because the amount of impact we have is negligible anyway.
Well, you mentioned federal politics, and of course you played a pivotal role in getting rid of Bill Shorten. You called him Shifty Shorten, and those ads really hit the mark. But this time around you're going after both parties. You're saying both major political parties have let you down. It's a different strategy. Take us through it.
Well, what it is responding to what people's needs are. I was contacted, and so were other people in our party, saying that nobody was standing up for so many Australians who felt their rights were being trampled on, who felt they had nowhere else to go. And Craig Kelly, I thought, was making a courageous stand in Parliament and deserved to be supported. So we resolved and discussed with Mr Kelly whether or not we should do something nationally.
He's an interesting choice, Clive.
He is, yeah.
What do you make of him?
I think he's a straight shooter. He's, one of the rarest commodities in politics is courage, and there's no doubt that he's got courage. He went out there, was criticised by his own party for having a different point of view. Now, you may not agree with Craig Kelly, you may not agree with me, but we, after all, live in a democracy, and we should have some respect for freedom of speech. We should have some respect for the public's right to know. We should have some respect for informed consent before you have a vaccine. So these sort of things are fundamental liberties that we've fought for in many world wars and our ancestors have died for. We can't desert them.
Those members that you mentioned earlier, the 60,000 odd that have joined your party, what sort of people are they?
Well, we've got a lot of people joining us from the Greens party. They've joined us because the Greens believe in mandatory vaccinations and they don't. And they may be sympathetic to other Green policies, but...
Hippies?
Some of them may be hippies, but they've joined us. We've got blue-class workers, blue-collar workers from Melbourne and from Newcastle and places like that. They've got disgruntled members of the Labor Party. When you join our party, the form asks you, what other political parties have you been in? Why did you leave, right? And the majority of them left because they don't like the degradation of their human rights, of lockdowns. They believe in a fair go. Some of them have joined us. They're small business owners that have seen their businesses destroyed in Sydney, in the lockdown in Sydney and elsewhere, right? We've had over 25,000 people of our 60,000 people join in Sydney, right? And that's an extraordinary thing. When I was in the LNP, I helped set up the LNP, we had a great day. The first day we did that, we had 685 members. When Craig Kelly announced he was standing for Prime Minister, we got 5,000 members in one day. Right? I've never seen that before. And I can tell you now there's a shift underway in Australian politics. And I don't think our politicians, our professional politicians, can see it. But the people are angry. They're angry for a lot of reasons. Vaccinated people are angry because they've got vaccinated, they've followed the government's point of view and nothing's happened. They've got no more freedom. They still can't run their businesses. They still can't have a job. They're angry. Construction workers are angry with Dan Andrews in Victoria because he's mandating that they have to get vaccinated to support their families. I said that a lot of people are upset because of no future for the country or no direction. So we think we can do better than that. It's not about vaccinations or lockdowns. It's about how can we make Australia a better country.
And to those who accuse you of scaremongering?
Well, everyone's entitled to their point of view, but I think that's a cheap shot. You've asked me some serious questions. I've given you some detailed answers, and they're the sort of things they should be addressing if they've got any credibility. But unfortunately, most of our politicians are very, very weak. They don't have much depth in their analysis, and most of them don't really know what's going on.
Clive, you came up with Shifty Shorten. What are you going to call Anthony Albanese?
Well, I don't know, but when you look at him, you say he's awful. So awful elbow, I guess.
So that'll be the catchphrase for your campaigning and your advertising leading into the federal
I can't
election.
say whether our committee will approve it, but to me, I think he's awful. He keeps wearing that country party hat into all urban electorates. He thinks he's Tim Fisher. My God, why doesn't he concentrate in the country? He's got to do something for Australia. Why doesn't he kick his Labor premiers in the arse and get them to care about the country?